Bills Mafia, good morning. And thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode. We have received some very fun Bills news this past week, specifically yesterday, as Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have both been extended. We are going to talk about that and also the Buffalo Bills' exciting running back room on this week's episode of Under Review. Let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
And once again, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa, and as always, I have a stacked panel of guests today. You recognize their faces from all of our content here on the network, but I will let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Chris and go to Thomas. Tell the people what you got and who you are.
Well, I'm Chris Kepner, one of the team here at Cover One, and Joe asked me to jump on here this morning, and I'm happy to be here to talk about my favorite coach GM combination and some running backs.
All right.
So I am also a Cover One content creator. My name is Thomas Salas. You guys know me from Buffalo Late Night every Thursday nights at 9 p.m. I am presently, actually, so my side gig, which is not a side gig, it's my main gig. I am a mailman by trade. I am presently meandering the streets of Rochester, giving every wonderful person stuff they don't like. So I'm here to talk about the Buffalo Bills. I'm enthralled by the idea, and man, I am ready to get spicy about the fact that Sean McDermott is staying until 2027.
Yes, and Thomas, I just want you to know, Roy just hit us with a banger comment. Is Thomas trying to be Bruce Nolan today? That's great.
Bruce Nolan is trying to meet me.
Ooh, hot takes already. And RJ, good morning. Thank you for tuning in. All of you in the chat, all 24 of you and counting, watching so far. Again, thank you so much for being here. Before we kick off today's discussion, I just want to ask you all to please drop a like on this video, as well as subscribe to Cover One if you haven't already, and check the description for a link to the Cover One Premium Pass. Join the premium Slack channel. You'll get some insight, some insider news, as well as some very fun discussion on all things Buffalo Bills. But in the meantime, while you're doing that, let's have a fun discussion, fellas. And once again, thank you both for joining me. I had to rearrange some things this morning as far as guests go. So for you guys to both be here on short notice, it really is greatly appreciated. So now, our first topic, as the title suggests, are the extensions of a Mr. Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. And this was news that was received with somehow mixed reactions. And mixed reactions coming from people who I do understand where they are coming from as far as the emotional component of the reaction. I've said that a million times on this show. I will beat that drum constantly. Football's an emotional game. You want to win. When you don't get the result you want, it breeds to a more heated discussion. And Thomas and I were in Twitter Spaces yesterday having a discussion about this, and we heard all different opinions on it, and we appreciate all of your opinions. But Chris, Thomas, today, I really want to just dive into kind of our thoughts on the extensions. How do we feel about pulling the trigger on getting both of these guys to stay in Buffalo throughout the 2027 season? Do we like it? Do we hate it? And more so, what do you think? Just beyond, like, if this wasn't to happen, who else would be out there? And is it more justifiable to keep these guys here for the foreseeable future? So Chris, I'll start with you. We'll go to Thomas.
My only complaint about the extensions for Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane is that they weren't longer, honestly. I've said it on Cover One and Friends before. As far as I'm concerned, these guys are lifers. I would like to have them around as long as they are, working in the NFL. Like, they've shown enough to me at this point. They know how to run a successful football team. They know how to put the Bills in a position to get, the ultimate result that everyone's looking for, which is a Super Bowl. They haven't made it to a Super Bowl yet, but that to me is kind of a flawed perspective. If you're evaluating, your coach and GM, and you're only looking at that specific thing, it's just not the it's just not an effective way to look at the situation, in my opinion. Um, we were talking before the show, and I was looking up some James Cook stuff, and just like had the last season's game log in front of me, um, and reminded myself that like we lost 3 games in the regular season by a combined 8 points, which of course we beat that to death last season, but it's still true. Like, and just the degree of expectation that we have now in Buffalo because of the success that these guys have brought to the area. It's gotten to a point where it's almost a little bit out of hand. I know everybody wants Buffalo to win a Super Bowl. Of course, I want to see that. Um, one of my first memories was wide right. Like, not even wide right, but like my family's reaction to wide right, because it was just like such a, it was a huge moment. Everyone's still trying to get, past these 4 Super Bowls in the 90s and a 17-year playoff drought. But, go back to any point in that drought and imagine, the coach and GM had anywhere close to the results that you've seen from the Bills in the last, 5-6 years. It's crazy to me to think that there are people out there that are calling for Sean McDermott or Brandon Beane's head. I mean, that's just, I don't know, man. That doesn't compute for me. And I know it's probably more of a fringe group in the fan base than, than like anywhere approaching a majority. Like, I don't think it's anything like that, but still, like, it still bothers me when people try to say that they're not good enough to be in their jobs here in Buffalo, because I don't know, what's the alternative, guys? What are you looking for? I I don't see it. Keep these guys here. I think that one of the things about Buffalo is, we've been through so many coaches through that drought period. I mean, if you were a Pittsburgh fan, you'd be used to patience. You'd be used to letting this stuff play out and see, I mean, they've had 2 coaches in how many years? I forget now, but it's like that's what I want for the Bills. I want, Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane to be around for a good long time. And 2027 is great. I would have been happy with 2029, 2031, you name it. These guys want to be around. Let's keep them.
Thomas, what do you think?
So, first off, being 35 years old, I've seen every type of Bills game, coach, general manager, and quarterback, everything in between. And we all know this. Being a Bills fan, you end up earning your stripes, right? Like, you earn your fandom from everything we've been through. And I get that. And we're all allowed to have an opinion. Whether that's correct or not is indifferent. But there's varying degrees of how people can feel about the present coaching staff. My biggest issue, in terms of if there were people that were against the extension of Sean McDermott, truly, is the fact that if you look at what Sean McDermott has done, even with the issues in between, he has been beyond successful. He has taken a team that, for the most part, was a laughing stock, was for the most part a group of people that people sat there and said, nah, Buffalo, really? Nah, we're okay. Nobody wants to go to Buffalo. It's the Arctic, it's Siberia, it's a place that people's careers go to die. And that's not the case anymore. Whether it's people wanting to use it as a bouncing board so that they can revitalize their career, where people want to go to win a championship, or where people are now returning, i.e. Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson, who have realized that the best versions of who they are in Buffalo. The best versions of themselves, where they are literally succeeding at a different echelon, is here in Buffalo. And that starts at the top. People want to find every which way, excuse me, to blame McDermott for the deficiencies. And have there been some? Yeah, absolutely. But that's across the board, across the NFL. Every coaching staff, every head coach, every coordinator, every position coach, whomever, there have been deficiencies and issues. But what you can't say is the fact that Sean McDermott hasn't built something for sustained success. And that is 100% certain. You have seen that this team has gone from being a bottom dweller to 8-8 and 7-9 and 6-10 to a team that now won the division 3 years in a row by a margin that is pretty significant. Excuse me. Then on top of that, the fact that they have literally beaten their division opponents at an overwhelming margin. And that doesn't even include the fact that that Sean McDermott has created a culture that is so exemplary that other teams now use him, that use the Bills as a model for the rest of the NFL. That tells you everything you need to know. Now, again, like I've said, is there things that need to be improved on? You're damn right. Every team does. But I'm going to ride with a guy that has taken this team to the edge of greatness, because I have said this time and again, when you want to win, you get as many lottery tickets as possible. Period. That's why draft, when you go to the NFL draft, getting as many picks as possible is fun, because it gives you the most odds to get as many good players as possible. The more times you can get into the playoffs, the better odds you have of getting to the Super Bowl and breaking through. That's who I believe can do that for us, is Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. They are the two guys that are going to put us in a position to be successful long term, not for the moment, not for tomorrow, long term. And that's why I'm with Cap. Sign him for life. I don't really care. I know people say like, oh, you can get better. Yeah, you can. But you know what else can happen? You can get worse.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with both of you. I'm going to pull up this comment from Trey here. So Eric, I believe is it Eager? Probably. Formerly of PFF spoke on his podcast about how the public is way too low on the Bills in 2023 from an analytics perspective. That's a huge Chiefs fan saying that. Yes. So to both of your points, I first and foremost agree, because you've seen the foundation that both Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have laid out for the Buffalo Bills since their drought era, since the kind of blunders of past head coach regimes with like Doug Whaley, Russ Brandon in the mix. Those eras were dark, and they were very, very much a kind of I guess you could call it a case study of how not to run a team, or how to keep a team at perpetual mediocrity. And it was almost more disheartening to be mediocre than it was to just be outright bad. Because when you're outright bad, your draft stock is higher, you're going to get better picks. Maybe there's the opportunity to get a generational talent faster. But when you're floating in the 6-10, the 7-9, 5-11, back when, it was that record, that's when you talk about just being a middling wasteland. And that's what, unfortunately, being a Bills fan felt like for so many years. Then you bring in a head coach that really established the locker room, the culture, tried to make things more serious, tried to make people more accountable, tried to tie people together. And again, that doesn't always mean there won't be a clash of ideologies. It just means that you're really trying to work on getting the best character out of people, or bringing in people that you feel are high character guys to kind of fill your locker room and play for you. And then Brandon Beane comes in and proves his worth as a GM. Obviously, there's critiques you could maybe make about his drafting, but free agency, his contract, his ability to create contracts that favor the cap, his ability to navigate the cap is what I think makes him such a great, credible GM, and someone that I'd want leading this organization for the foreseeable future. With Brandon Beane, again, those are really the only critique I have of him, is maybe missing on some draft picks, maybe some questionable decisions like the Boogie Basham pick, which we've all agreed seemed to be a bit too early at the time, and maybe some other picks that you just didn't see pan out the way you'd like them to. But as far as all the other components of being a GM, I have no problems with Brandon Beane. I think he's exemplary. I think he is the GM that could lead this team to a Super Bowl, and that is why I'm confident and happy they extended him. I'm happy about the McDermott extension 100% and agree with both of you. Sean McDermott is on track to become the winningest head coach in Bills history, on track to. And regular season, again, Chris, you brought it up. You talked about the close games and how 3 losses, and obviously the Bengals game we won't know the outcome of ever, so I'm going to exclude that despite the game not starting out great in the regular season. Those 3 losses, again, were all by a combined 1 score, correct? Each game was 1 score, not a combined 1 score, but it was like 8 points, 2 points, and I think the other one was a touchdown. Regardless, I'd have to look at the chart.
It was 8 points. That's actually a combined 1 score.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, either way, what I'm trying to get at is all those games were close. You win 13 games during the regular season. And you're talking about a guy that gets to the playoffs, and now we can start to kind of point out some of the flaws with McDermott, because some of the valid criticisms that I've heard are maybe an over management of his personnel, maybe an overly cautious approach in the playoffs, right? And one of the things that's been brought up on shows in the past is how many checks the defense runs. And I know that could be partially attributed to Frazier, but McDermott is the one who's got to give the call on that too. That's valid criticism. And when we spoke in Twitter Spaces yesterday, something I do agree with is it does obviously have to happen at some point, and preferably soon, considering that the team seems to be trending towards a transitional period. Not that they'll be bad, but that because of certain contracts kicking in and becoming more expensive, the team is going to have to transition to a base of younger talent, developing younger talent that could work out or could not work out, depending on how you draft, depending on how the scouts evaluated these players. For me personally, where I think there's valid criticism is Sean McDermott is the head coach. He is the face of the room. He leads these players and to some extent has fault and has a hand in a lot of things. But where I think it's misguided hate, and where I think the fans and the people who detract from McDermott should take a step back and just kind of reassess, is the nuance of being a head coach and realizing that despite being that face, despite employing these people, there are genuinely things that could happen that are beyond your control. And I made this example yesterday, but let's talk about Josh Allen in the Vikings game, right? Let's talk about the overtime interception that lost the game. And let's talk about when that throw happened. Let's talk about the routes that were ran. Let's talk about the decision making. Do you think that's Sean McDermott's fault? Because I don't. What I think that was a terrible decision by a quarterback who got two in his head and wanted to win a game as soon as he possibly could, but didn't need to, had plenty of time, had plenty of downs to work with, and made a terrible decision. In the playoffs, if that same thing is to happen, are you going to blame Sean McDermott? Now, this is not me absolving Sean McDermott of past failures in the playoffs, but more for me to say that we should approach it with a gray area and evaluating how much of this blame can be passed off to the head coach and how much of this blame can be attributed to coordinators, could be attributed to your quarterback, could be attributed to wide receivers, corners. It's a multifaceted point of error. And I think a head coach and a team, when you get to the playoffs, they have to be sharp. You also have to be lucky, which doesn't get talked about enough. And I think Bruce Nolan made a great point about this. We have the hindsight to recognize that some plays are a bounce or maybe a drop away from being complete time-changing events, but we don't have the foresight to see that. And that, to me, I think plays well into the Sean McDermott discussion, because we talk about his failures, but again, certain things that are beyond his control can happen that don't particularly put full fault on him, but still lead to the same failure. But at the same time, in 20 years from now, are we going to be talking about that? So, Thomas, I'll go back to you. We'll go back to Chris, but give me your thoughts on that, just what I said, and really just more about the idea of his playoff blunders and how much you think should be attributed to him versus kind of everybody else, and where you see that in evaluation of Sean McDermott.
So the tough thing is, and I had this argument, I've had this argument many times. People want to talk about Sean McDermott and they want to put a broad stroke of a paintbrush over him and say that all these things in conglomeration are all the same, or this was an issue and this was all that would that happened. And the problem with that, just the same as if you were to look at somebody's life, you can't do that. You can't look at something and make a narrative-based statement without really looking at the facts and breaking it down and I like to say contextualize things, because you do have to actually find what happened in every instance and what led to each specific instance of whether it's a loss or a win or whatever it may be. And you can go through his tenure as a Buffalo Bills coach. And yes, have there been issues? Absolutely. I've said that. I just said that a few minutes ago, right? Like, if you went through each season, there are things that he needed to get better on. But again, and I always like to go back to Andy Reid. People like to compare Andy Reid to him, which has some fairness and some complete inequality because of the fact that Andy Reid's been coaching for over 25 years. If you look at what Sean McDermott has done, he has grown from his first year to now. Are there things he still needs to improve on in terms of his processes? Yes. That is absolutely true, but that is the same and can be said for most coaches in the NFL. When you look at most of his time throughout his tenure as a head coach for the Buffalo Bills, what I think it's been marked by is lesser of mistakes, but more so of overcoming massive adversity. And I want to bring back last year because I think that people keep forgetting really what they went through as an organization, as a team, and as an individual basis. What Sean McDermott was able to do and how he was able to help this team bridge the gap amongst the emotional and physical traumas of last season truly cannot it can't be it can't be put into perspective and framed the way people want it to, because you can't fathom it in a real sense. Like, unless you are physically involved, it's hard to actually look at what happened last year and be like, oh wow, that was tough. Nobody knows except for the people inside those walls, and we never probably will. The emotional damage that season had on a lot of these players will probably linger for a while. What happened with Damar Hamlin is an effect that could potentially have life-altering changes to a person's mental psyche. I mean, we talk all the time, and I don't want to get deep down this rabbit hole, but people talk all the time about when people come back from the war and the PTSD that they can have from dealing with watching one of their comrades fall in a military setting. And I'm not saying that's that, but when you see a guy that you spend every day of the week with, and he dies on the football field, and you watch him have to be resuscitated, that has real life application to who they are as a person, not as a football player. And that's sometimes I think there's a disconnect of, these are people. Like, as much as we want, and this is entertainment, these are still people who have families and have real lives outside of the football field. And this is stuff that Sean McDermott has to manage on a day-to-day basis. He has to manage their emotions, manage their well-beings, manage their diets, manage the staffing. Like, what he has done on a very overview scale is remarkable. And yes, there are, whether it's owners or GMs or coaches that are horrific at what they do. But just like Kepner said, and just like Joe said, and a lot of people have said, what this organization has done is remarkable. Truly. What Brandon Beane has done to transform this organization is remarkable. What Sean McDermott has done with the culture, which people don't, they think it's a joke. Culture is 100% a real thing. And if you don't believe it, I implore you to look at some franchises like the Raiders over the history and see the lack of culture and what that can do to an organization. Sean McDermott and what he did last year, it's imperative that you take that as a masterclass of being able to have an organization be successful, 13-3, and still deal with everything they went through. I think that there are issues, there are things that he needs to work on. I think that there is luck into everything, and the Bills have not had any of it at all. If you look at the playoffs, they have been on the wrong side of luck every single time, whether it's matchup seeding, whether it's gameplay. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens should have won against the Bengals last year. They should have played the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs last year. The Baltimore Ravens couldn't get it done because, I mean, Henley is terrible. I mean, there's so many things that you can look at that have not gone their way. But what I can tell you is Sean McDermott has done more right than wrong. And I think that's something you need to look at. People like to pinpoint what's wrong in our society more than they look at all the accolades of a person, because one wrongdoing blemishes somebody's career. Well, that's not Sean McDermott, man. I will bang the drum that Sean McDermott has been a beacon of positivity and hope for this franchise, and he should be going forward as well.
What you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how people will latch on to a certain play, a certain result and give it more weight, I think, than it's due. I think a lot of this is going to change, when Buffalo finally gets over that hump and brings that Lombardi Trophy home. But for now, it's like, Brian brought it up. If I could just bring up this comment, the McDermott talks about accountability, but he scapegoats the special teams coach after 13 seconds, and then the safeties coach after the Bengals loss. That – honestly, that wasn't really my read on the situation. I think that, Buffalo, if they can get over that hump and bring that Lombardi Trophy home, it's I think that, McDermott has been fairly accountable. The the special teams coach thing, look, that may or may not have been connected to the end of that Chiefs game. From what we understand, like there was a squib kick called, right, that the call never made it to Tyler Bass somehow. Was he fired for that? Was he even fired actually? Didn't he make a lateral move down to
I'd have to look it up. I was going to say this season, but I just remembered that was DB's coach. That wasn't safeties. Let me look that up for you.
Yeah. So Salgado was let go this year, but so look, I just think that it's dangerous to make these connections because of, McDermott never came out and made a scapegoat out of anybody publicly. He's that situation. Like, if you want to make the connection between 13 seconds and the special teams coach leaving, okay. I mean, I think that it takes a certain degree of speculation, but even if that's the case, Sean McDermott never came out and said this was this guy's fault and he's out of here. Like that didn't happen. They dealt with it internally. They maintained, a united front in the sense that it was a team loss, and McDermott has always been, the leader of that ship, right? And I don't think that he's ever tried to make someone a scapegoat or pass the blame on. Salgado getting fired, I don't know if that had anything to do specifically with the Bengals loss. I mean, you can't. It's dangerous to make these assumptions. I think that A happened and then B happened, so obviously A led to B, and now Sean McDermott's making this guy a scapegoat. I think that you're drawing too many conclusions there without evidence to support it. And to Thomas's point about the sort of where the team was at from an emotional state and from what was going on off the field, there's some people out there who will start to say things like, well, you're making excuses. And look, I don't care. Like, Thomas is right in the sense that, like, the DeMar Hamlin situation, but it goes beyond that. Kim Pagula was the matriarch of this organization, had a traumatic event, and has been unable to perform her role with the team that that everyone has become used to. And John Butler, towards the end of last season, had a massive stroke, and all of a sudden the guy who's been on the radio for the team for years is unable to perform the role that we've gotten used to for him. Dawson Knox lost his brother. There's so many things. I mean, Josh was going through, we now know, a pretty messy breakup. These are not excuses, but they are context, right? And you have to consider these things. They're not things that your coach or GM can control. They do have an impact, whether you want to admit it or not. Should you be able to fight through and win? Maybe. Is it a sign of a good coach or a bad coach if you don't get that result? I just don't think that I don't think that you can draw that conclusion that, now McDermott's a bad coach because he wasn't able to rally the troops together to overcome all of these things. Like Thomas said, these guys are people. You got to remember that they're not bits on a TV screen that you control with a Xbox controller or something. They're real people. They go through, they're each their own universe of thought and feeling, right? I don't know, man. I'm gonna ramble. I the McDermott and Beane hate, man. I don't even know what to do with it anymore.
I wanna update. So yeah, they Farwell made a lateral move to Jacksonville after that game, and Smiley got promoted. So that was what actually happened. So
Yeah.
I agree with both of you, and I agree with the fact that what you said about like whether that makes him a good coach or not. I think the universal agreement is that Sean McDermott is a good coach, right? But I think where people value him for the Bills is that it comes to this idea of the window. And I have said I don't believe in the window. I don't think it's real for any team. I think there's been examples of teams in sports history that have kind of run a similar regime, like kind of had a status quo established and won later on. You know, I look at like guys like Reed, and I know he transitioned to the Chiefs, but, you know, it took him years to win the Super Bowl, as you mentioned, Thomas. I look at guys like McVay, who are good offensive minds, who just, you know, he got beat in a Super Bowl and came back and eventually won it and grew as a coach. Sean McDermott is not without blame. And I could put a couple of things on his shoulders, at least to some extent. I think the first Chiefs loss in the AFC Championship is one, not because he had a dreadful game, but I think the defense, you know, his coaching, it just wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't aggressive enough. I do distinctly remember him trying to kick a field goal at a point where he should have had a touchdown or went for a touchdown. So that's something I fault him for. Absolutely. 13 seconds, despite there being a myriad of communication errors. He is the head coach. He's got to get that in check. He's got to be on top of it. And he wasn't on top of it enough, and it led to a myriad of failure. However, I also think part of that is Leslie Frazier. Part of that is Levi Wallace. And there is a comment here. I need to find it real fast. So this was Roy, who said, not to beat a dead horse, but KC called a timeout after their first play, 13 seconds, and the Bills trotted out the same D on the following play. Frazier or McDermott goof? I think it's on both. But we know that Frazier was calling those plays. But also, Levi Wallace, after he left the Bills in the offseason that year, said he wasn't lined up in the right spot, and that apparently, like, where he was supposed to be was off to where they actually, like, the plan was not cohesive. So the communication errors, that is on your head coach, because he does have to get that in check. He does have to make sure these guys are in the right spot. But a lot went wrong at once, and I do think that as much as he needs to get it in check, it also has blame pointed in multiple directions. And this is really the point I'm trying to make is there needs to be accountability, but there also needs to be understanding of, like you said, Chris and Thomas, context. And like when you look at what the team went through this past year, that is absolutely valid. And you've had multiple guys on the roster say they felt like they were burnt out. Tywan Jones, for example, specifically pointed out that they just felt like they weren't there. They just felt like they had no energy. They had no juice. They couldn't get going. And that really does matter because, as Anthony said last week on this show, football is a game where you are asked to beat the crap out of somebody. I'm paraphrasing what somebody actually said. But in concept, you're asked to beat the crap out of somebody, and that's wear and tear on your body. That's wear and tear on your mind. And when you talk about all the things that this team had to go through over the course of not even a year, that does have to be mentioned when you talk about the 2022 Bills season. While it's not totally an excuse, it will provide you some context as to the why of the result. Can we blame Sean McDermott for the playoff loss? Yeah. But is it all on him? No, I don't think so, because one part of that loss had to do with a dreadful offensive line and two terrible. Ryan Bates is not a terrible interior guard, but he did not have a good game. Roger Saffold is a Pro Bowler by somehow the grace of God. He played awful that game. Their offensive line was woeful. Josh Allen was not sharp, maybe because of what you alluded to, Chris. There were a myriad of reasons that this team couldn't get going, and people point the finger at Ken Dorsey, but as Ant again said last week, there's reasons Ken Dorsey can't call certain plays. And the team offensively was woeful. And that Miami game where people point to this gracious offense that put up 35 points, Josh Allen had 3 turnovers, one of them for a touchdown. That is not on Sean McDermott. I don't care what you say. That's not. You know who that is on? Josh Allen for not assigning the proper protection and getting the ball stripped out of his hand. So don't try to come up with these narratives about McDermott for things that just simply aren't totally on him. If you want to go with the arbitrary, he's the face of the team, so it's his fault, then live your life that way. That's fine. But I don't agree. I think there needs to be an approach to this entire discussion about Sean McDermott for the positive that he's brought. Like you said, Thomas, the positives he's brought to this team and this organization. And we are allowed to hold him accountable, as I've tried to do in this episode and when I talk about him. But I also am willing to see beyond just him and see the myriad of reasons in a sport that is as variable as football, where every person is a chess piece that has to do their job to the perfect degree or else something goes wrong. I look at it as it's beyond him sometimes. And even though he is the head coach and there are things he can control, there are certain things that he simply just cannot control. So You are allowed to critique Sean McDermott. You are allowed to have an analysis, an opinion on Sean McDermott. What I say is only what I say. And if you do not like him after this sentiment, then that is fine. I cannot change your mind. But what I will ask for people who are reacting a bit overly emotional to this news is to just take a step back, to try and see things beyond just if it's McDermott or not. Look at the myriad of issues that bled into some of the playoff losses, to some of the regular season losses. Ask yourself if this is all on him. And ask yourself, too, are there ways he can get better? Because we can all tell you, yes, there are. But I do think if you are willing to use what has been more than McDermott, especially this past year, as your justification for him to be fired, for him to be gone, for this whole entire organization to change, I simply don't agree. And that will be my final thought on the matter. Thomas, Chris, I do want to talk about running backs for the last 20, 30 minutes of the show today. Do you guys have anything else you want to say before we move on? And I'll ask you, Chris. We'll go to Thomas after.
No, not really. I mean, just like I'm following along with the chat and Levi Wallace's part in the 13 seconds. And yeah, I mean, I think Kelsey came out. He made some comments about how, he saw that he had basically a free release to the seam. And, basically was screaming at Mahomes to throw it to him, right? Because, I mean, I guess Levi wasn't, it was probably supposed to have inside leverage to take that away. And, you saw what happened. I mean, Kelsey was wide open. There was just nothing, he was from the line of scrimmage. He had, he wasn't defended at all. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about McDermott and Beane at this point, but I hope that at some point here, we don't have to have this conversation, because it's wild to me that people who, especially if you've lived through the drought, it's crazy takes to me to say things like, we should find someone that's better than Sean McDermott to come in and get us to the promised land. I just don't see it.
I am appreciative of the Buffalo Bills for dropping content in our laps in June like this, because it takes the onus away from talking about Stephon Diggs being this terrible person, Fashion Nova, diva, a selfish human being. I have never seen a franchise where two of your primary people have been torn down in such a fashion. But hey, it's June. I get it. There's nothing else to talk about. And really, the sports world right now is kind of at a lull. So I guess that's what we're doing. I think, man, I think people are and maybe I'm a homer. I am a homer. Who am I kidding? I'm a Bills fan. I think the season's going to be really good. I think this team is poised to take another step in the right direction. They've got unbelievable young talent, and I think that once that happens and Sean McDermott takes us to the next step, which he's done so far, minus last season because of everything they went through. But you go back from when Sean McDermott got here, from Tyrod Taylor in 2017, and he broke the playoff drought. Then they had the reset where the team was bad. Then they make it back to the playoffs. And the next year they make it to the divisional round. And the year after that, they make it to the championship game. And then last year they made it to the divisional round because, they just ran out of gas. Sean McDermott has been an upward trajectory coach, and I anticipate that continuing this year. I think the fact that the media is not looking at the Bills in such a darling light of being a Super Bowl favorite is going to work in its favor, because there's less distraction for the Buffalo Bills. So you know what? Whatever. People want to sit there and find fault in Sean McDermott. I'm game on it, because I can't wait till he proves everybody wrong. I think Sean McDermott's great, and he's my girlfriend's favorite. He's my wife's favorite. That's her boyfriend. So,
well, my final thought on it before we move on, one last thing too, is I feel like the pressure of a lot of people to McDermott comes from the fact that this team hasn't won a Super Bowl. And yes, from the AFC Championship, you've had 2 years in that same spot. I think, as I alluded to before, I don't believe a window exists, but I think it does exist for a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of pressure from a lot of Bills fans who have not seen a Super Bowl win in their lifetime to get that. And I get that completely. We all want a championship here. I do not speak on this matter with the idea that I am okay with losing. I'm not okay with losing. I'm not okay with not winning a Super Bowl. Dude, I am a Yankees fan. I've seen enough mediocrity in one team. I do not need to see it in another. So understand that where I come from is a place of genuine, like, I am a fan and I want this team to win a Super Bowl, and I will hold Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane accountable for so if there is a valid reason and the blame can fully be pointed at them, which this season, Sean McDermott is your defensive coordinator. If there is defensive regression in the playoffs where the scheme looks sloppy, where no one is in the right position, people are struggling, the defensive line is healthy and not performing, your corners are healthy and they're not performing, health matters. But if they are healthy and there's a regression, we can talk about it and we can point our fingers maybe to Sean McDermott should that be the case. But for now, let's have a nuanced discussion about our coach. Let's be thankful that we're in this position to win, and let's hope that we can. And if a few years go by and we make it to 2027 and this team has no Super Bowl ring and we decide to move on from McDermott, we can look back and point out all of the flaws and they will be valid, and I'll eat crow. I will. And now, with all that being said, it's time to move on, guys. This was supposed to be an episode about the running backs, but of course the Bills dropped a truth bomb on us on Friday, which changed the whole direction. So if you are tuning in with us and you were really excited for running back talk, I apologize that we had to devote the first half of the show to that. But it was a good discussion, and I appreciate all of the sentiment from both of you and all of you in our comment section. Keep it up. And for all of you that have not heard us from the start of the show, please like this. Like the videos on Cover One. Subscribe to the Premium Pass. And subscribe to all of our shows on all of our networks, whether that's Apple, Spotify, or Google. I know Google had some issues last week. I will try to fix that this week. I'm not really sure what was going on with that, so I'll look into it. But let's move on to the running backs, because there is a lot to talk about with a very exciting Buffalo Bills running back room. And ultimately, my understanding of this team being as general as possible, not bringing up any numbers yet, to just talk about how the room felt. I think where the room had issues was both in tendency, in that Ken Dorsey strayed away from the run too quickly, as something I alluded to last week, and also interior guard play and really no push from this line unless they were running gimmicky outside runs. It felt like the interior can never hold their own in the running game, and it felt like no matter what we tried to do, any sort of power style run, any sort of gut punch run, especially on the short downs, felt like it was a laboring task. And it felt like this became a chore for Josh Allen to now have to inherit, and became something of an over-reliance on him. So before we go into the players, Chris, I'll start with you. We'll go to Thomas. Just talk to me about your general opinion of the Bills' rushing attack last year and what you think it could look like this year.
It's going to be, I mean, look, your 1A guys in Houston now, so it's necessarily going to look a lot different. In some respects, right? I mean, James Cook and Devin Singletary have different styles, and I feel like it at least seems like Cook is going to be that 1A guy this year. But you've got Damien Harris coming in, who has a similar style to Singletary, right? And you know, I love the signing of Latavius Murray. I feel like, especially when you are talking about those short yardage situations, you know, he's a guy who's been doing it for a long time. He's still super efficient. I hope that, you know, it seems to me like they're going to have, this is 4 running backs on the roster on the 53 this year, which is, you know, if you count Tywan Jones, yeah, they've done that in the past, but I mean, 4 actual running backs who are going to get carries or touches one way or another. Heinz might be more of that receiving guy, but I think it's going to look different this year, and I think that, you know, the Bills have a little bit more of a multiple attack and options, right? I mean, people will complain that Heinz wasn't as involved as they wanted last year. Look, it takes some time. He was a mid-season acquisition. I thought that he was pretty involved, even as a decoy, throughout the second half of the season. So even while he might not have shown up on the stat sheet as much as you'd want, he did make his presence felt on the field. So you've got 4 guys that like could have legitimate involvement, and that's something that we haven't seen here for a while.
What you got, Thomas?
So I had a nice little thread the other day about James Cook, and People last year were high praise for Breece Hall, and rightfully so. Breece Hall was unbelievable. You know who else was unbelievable? Was James Cook. They literally had almost the exact same stat line: carries, yards per carry, the most 15 plus yard rushes. They were very close and in just big plays. James Cook has all the ability with very little usage, and he was used sparingly. So much so that he had one game against the Titans in the beginning of the season last year, and then the rest he averaged 3 carries a game through week 10. Obviously, in the back end of the season, that jumped quite a bit, but that tells you what you need to know, because Breece Hall in the first 7 games, week 5, week 6, and week 7 averaged 25 carries. That's massive. That means he's the bell cow. James Cook didn't get that opportunity, and even in the biggest points of the season, he still didn't. So I think what you're going to see this season is, one, a little bit more of a balanced rushing attack. But I think the big thing is, quite frankly, and this is nothing against Devin Singletary, very nice guy, did nice things, but he never scared an opposing defensive coordinator. He wasn't fast enough to beat you on the field, and he wasn't big enough to beat you and roll you over. So realistically, when he was your bell cow back, for what it is worth, in for the Buffalo Bills, there's no such thing, but he was that. They didn't have to game plan, and it made the Bills, quite frankly, one-sided on their offensive game plan. So I think now that you've got a guy like James Cook, who I believe in, if he turns even to 90% of his brother, can be impactful beyond measure. And then you also have old man Latavius Murray, who is 33. I say old man, he's younger than me. Latavius Murray, who still is very, very, very good, and in fact had his best year as a pro last season over 2 teams. And Damien Harris, who every year seemed to have his best game against us. You have a rushing attack that really now poses a distinct threat. It makes it so that defensive coordinators genuinely have to sit there and say, okay, we don't have to just worry about Josh Allen. We do have to worry about James Cook. We do have to worry about Damien Harris. And if Damien Harris, and we've seen this before, those have one of the best programs for players to be able to stay healthy and get healthy. If Damien Harris can find health with the Buffalo Bills, that's another guy that has been very, very good all the way back to his days in Alabama. So what the Bills can bring this season is what I think fans and media, really in conjunction, have been clamoring for a number of years, is just the Bills to be able to have a balanced but a complementary rushing attack that makes the defense actually have to respect the run. Because thus far, up until this point, they didn't have to, and that causes a defensive game plan where the linebackers don't have to sit near the line of scrimmage. The safeties can just sit back and wait for Josh to try to, chuck deep bombs like he has been. So I think this really changes how we can play the game, how Josh can be creative, how Dorsey can be creative. That's the thing. People want to talk about Dorsey. Guess what? You know what this does? This opens up a whole nother section of the playbook.
I agree completely, both of you. And one thing I said last week is I foresee not only the Bills' passing attack, but in tandem with the rushing attack. And as a whole, I think the Bills this year I guess you can call it a hot take, which I don't like doing, but it's something I believe, is that they're going to be the most efficient offense in the league. Best by metrics, we'll see, but efficient, absolutely. They built themselves up to be that way. With the running room this year, you did not only improve your room of backs, where you have James Cook, who's now going to be the established one. And I saw in the comments, you guys were talking about what he said. He did say he's going to be the one, and he should be the one, because he brings you a lot to this offense, and his development curve could alone be a huge impact on this offense. You bring in Damien Harris, who the only worry I have about him is his injuries, but if he's healthy, he is an incredibly good, elusive, contact balance master back. You've seen it when we've played the Patriots and how hard he is to bring down and how good his top speed is. He's a great running back. And the fact that we got him for the price we did, I know it was because of his injury, but this guy healthy brings you an automatic third down and short goal line weapon that really is very hard to stop. You talk about Old Man Murray, 33 years old. Old Man Murray played in 12 games, not because he was hurt, because he joined someone's practice squad, then got promoted. He was on the Saints originally, I think, and then went to the Broncos and got promoted. Correct me if I'm wrong on the first team. And he had 688 yards. He averaged 4.3 yards per attempt at a 33-year-old running back in 12 games. Naim Heinz didn't have great rushing numbers, but Naim Heinz is a great return man. That's going to be his role based on the contract restructure, but he's a capable passing option too for the screen game, which you need to galvanize because it freaking sucked last year for the Bills. Now, you haven't even gotten into the fact that they've restructured the interior of the offensive line, that you've added in a high upside rookie in Osiris Torrance. You've added in a guy like Nick Broker who has the potential to play guard or tackle, that you've added in David Edwards to be backup. And then you added in Connor McGovern to be your primary other side guard. And again, while he didn't have the greatest rushing grade, a lot of Dallas fans have clarified that he is fully capable in that role. And he's also going to be working with Deion Dawkins next to him and a very good center next to him who might improve his running ability as a whole. And even if you don't, then rushes to the right side with Spencer Brown, who's already a very good run blocker, to combine with an inline Dawson Knox, to combine with the Trent Shearfield. And you have these capable backs with top speed who are hard to bring down, who fall forward. I don't understand how no one in the national circuit talks about this room as much as we do, because on paper, they have not just a lot, an unbelievable amount of potential to alone change the framework of this offense. Now, this is not for me to say that I think the Bills are going to stray away from passing the ball primarily, because I think there will always be a pass first team, a 60-40 split when you have Josh Allen. Why in the world would you not want to use his arm? But the pressure component of this offense, the have to versus want to, is going to change. It's not going to be a we have to run Josh Allen all the time. It's going to be a we want to run Josh Allen because you have no idea how the hell to defend our offense, and we want to get silly with it. And Allen will probably make it work because he's a great running quarterback. Or, hey guys, we're in the red zone. We need to punch this ball in. Rather than us holding our breaths and praying that Josh can sneak it over and someone might slap it out of his hand or knock him down early, we might have the middle finger running back room this year with interior guards that can push up the middle and can push these running backs through with guys like Damien Harris, who are really hard to bring down. And that alone excites me. This offense this year excites me, but this running back room, and the reason why I label it exciting running back room, when healthy, assuming they can be healthy, we will see, could be a top 5 room, or at least the proponent to create a top 5 offense and maybe the best offense in the league. So guys, let's talk about our first running back in this room, someone you guys are all very excited to talk about. I can see in the comment section, Mr. James Cook. And Thomas, we're going to start with you. This past year, James Cook played in 17 games. I am including playoffs, mind you. He's 23 years old. On 106 carries, 560 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 fumble in his very first game of his career. He averaged the second most for a running back in the league, yards per attempt at 5.3. He also had 180 receiving yards and a single touchdown. Talk to me, Thomas, about your expectations for James Cook specifically and how you think he'll finish the year.
So I believe James Cook is going to have an incredible role and a large impact within this offense. I think you've seen, once Josh trusts a player, and you saw that moving forward last year, that he becomes more of a pivotal player in terms of how Josh utilizes the offense. I think when it comes to the screen game, Josh couldn't utilize it as much because of his UCL injury, but when he could, he did. And that became more and more of a large piece to that game. And James Cook is incredible at that. I think what he can do, what he brings, his balance, his ability to shift gears. I mean, they always said with Devin Singletary, he can make a guy miss in a phone booth. James Cook can do the same thing, but he also has that put his foot in the ground, bust a 60-yard run speed. We saw that against the Bears. I think James Cook is going to be somebody that people are going to sit there and say, how in the world did the Bills end up getting this guy when they did? The other part about this is, and I mentioned this about Breece Hall. Breece Hall was a featured back, and he got ran into the ground. A lot of times when they talk about ACL injuries, what they don't mention is the wear and tear before that even happened. That's one thing you can't say with James Cook. James Cook hasn't been run into the ground. He's been used in such a fashion that's allowed him to be able to elongate his career, which for a running back is something that can't be said generally speaking. Running backs have a 3-year window generally, and that's it. What can bring James Cook some longevity in the Bills offense is his multifaceted approach of both catching and running the ball and his ability to stay healthy. And if he can do both those things, I think he's going to have a very, very fruitful career. And I think this year is just going to be the start of that. I think he's going to be somebody that you're going to see is becoming, and I hate to use the fantasy approach, but you're going to see he is going to be owned as a hefty share just the season alone because of what he can do both in the passing and the actual running offense style.
What'd you think, Chris?
So I think that the usage is difficult to predict with these guys. 2.5 of them are new to the team, right? I'm giving Heinz the half because it'll be his first offseason with the team. I think the easiest, if there's an easy thing to predict, it's probably James Cook being the leading rusher for the team and it having that primary role. The thing that excited me the most about James Cook coming out of Georgia was his pass catching ability. And that's something that we saw just little hints of, I think, in Buffalo last year. I mean, they used him out of the backfield some. I think he was targeted 32 times throughout the year.
You're right, 33, but yeah, you hit it.
So, but I think that was kind of sparingly in terms of what he can do. It seems to me, and this is just me kind of guessing a little bit at what they're doing, but I feel like they wanted to get him acclimated as a runner in the offense so that they can kind of build on the pass catching role as they go and make him into this dual threat guy who, when he's on the field, you don't expect pass, you don't know what to expect, right? It could be, he could be a play called to him as a run, or he could be one of 4, pass catching options. And he can run beyond just screens and, like little angle routes and stuff. He can do slants, he can do wheel routes, and, you make these crazy catches down the field. You get that stuff going with him, and all of a sudden it stretches the defense vertically with your running back. I mean, there's just so many possibilities here. And, as for the screen game, of course, it would be cool to see more halfback screens. The Bills tend to not do a lot of that, but they do a bunch of wide receiver screens. So, I mean, their screen game it exists. It's just a little different. Maybe we'll see more of the running back screen too. But I do think that, Devin Singletary has vacated the room. That is 52 targets up for grabs. That's not counting the playoffs. I guess it's 60 targets if you count the whole season. Those are going to go somewhere. Maybe to Heinz, but I feel like Cook is going to be used out of the backfield quite a bit. And I would expect him to get, Devin Singletary had 1,100 yards last year in his role. I'd expect that to be the floor for Cook. I think you're muted, Joe.
Go me, guys. That's the first time I've ever done that on this show, and it had to happen at some point, and it finally did. I wear my crown of shame, and I apologize to all of you, but I will wear it with pride. Anyways, I was going to say that. Over 1,000 all-purpose yards for James Cook seems realistic. Something that Hans has said on this show in the past is that he doesn't believe that the team will ever have a 1,000-yard rusher. I actually agree with that, but I don't think that's a bad thing. What I have always said, especially when it comes to yards about any player offensively, if you want to talk about the same argument with Dalton Kincaid as a rookie tight end, is to me, I don't consider arbitrary yards, touchdowns, and everything a total failure if they're not what we kind of expected them to be going into the year. What I do think is if their role, if their presence is working in a galvanized machine of an offense where everyone else thrives because they can do what they do at its best. For example, if James Cook turns into this hybrid running back receiver role and maybe accrues over 1,000 all-purpose yards, but not 1,000 yards in either category, that is very successful to me because what that tells me is they're using him, that he's being relied on, that he's helping out, and also he's not getting as many yards because the ball can only go to so many people at once, one at a time, most of the time, unless you run some weird trick play. So for me, it's like, I'm fine with James Cook not having 1,000-yard rushing season ever, but that does not mean James Cook is not making an impact. What it means is, hey, we don't run the ball as much as we pass the ball. We're just using it because we can, not because we have to. I look at the Chiefs as a great example of this. The Chiefs didn't have 1,000-yard rusher last year, but their running game was very effective. That's partially because you have an Andy Reid calling your plays, but Jerick McKinnon and Pacheco were very effective runners. They didn't need to have the flashy 1,000-yard rushing year because they were just able to move the ball when they needed to move the ball, and they could rely on that rushing attack when Mahomes got hurt. So now we talk about the Bills, who in my eyes are trying to do the same damn thing. They want to rush at you. They want to be able to have a two-way player. Yes, I use the term two-way, Thomas. They want to be able to have a two-way running back that's a rusher and a pass catcher to be able to just have more versatility in this offense and to accrue yards and maybe be a threat in the red zone. So my thought on James Cook is I think he replicates the success. He's young. I think he's going to have a better rushing year as a whole, and I think a better receiving year as a whole. 1,000 all-purpose yards is my expectation, which I don't think is unrealistic for someone who has now your self-proclaimed number one. So now, Chris, we'll start with you as we move on to Mr. Damien Harris, former New England Patriot that I loathed watching them play against because he always seemed to burn us. But he has decided to join what is now the modern AFC East dark side. That's right, guys. A Patriot, ex-Patriot, looked at the Buffalo Bills contract offer and said, I want to play for them. Bathe in that, soak in it, and realize that the guy who is responsible for that is here till 2027. Boom. All right. Damien Harris. He only played in 11 games, but he got hurt. He is 26 years old. Fun fact, he's younger than me. I am going to go cry after this show. 106 carries, 463 yards, 4.4 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns. Injury skewed these numbers, and he wasn't very prominent pass catching threat. Chris, tell me what you think about Damien Harris in the offense this year.
I remember as I was getting ready for fantasy football draft last offseason, there were analysts talking about Damien Harris as this like untapped like stud running back potentially that just, you know, if he could put together a full season and get the usage, right? I mean, he would for a while there in New England, it was, you know, the way that they use running backs there, it's kind of like they've always been reluctant, it seems, to have a bell cow back. They won't like mixing these guys. Like if you play fantasy football, you're usually not taking Patriots running backs high. I mean, Ramondre Stevenson has kind of broken the mold there a little bit, but that's to, you know, the point about Damien Harris and whether he's kind of hit his ceiling as a healthy player. I mean, some of that has been dialed back just by the presence of Ramondre Stevenson in that running back room. Now he comes to Buffalo and he's in a role where he's sharing the load. Like he's not going to be the bell cow back here. I honestly, at this point, like I kind of hinted at when we were talking about James Cook, it's tough to predict what's going to happen behind him, but it seems to me like Harris is the most likely guy to be that sort of 1B running back, you know, with Heinz and Murray kind of filling in more role players in situations. So, I mean, I think he could get a good amount of run. I mean, if you look at what Cook got as the 1B last year, I believe you already said this, but, you know, he had 89 carries and 33 targets, you said, right? And again, I keep going regular season, not including the playoff stuff.
If you include playoffs, it's 106 carries, and then he had 33 targets and 21 receptions.
Yeah, I mean, and if Damien Harris has anything close to that, it's going to be a significant role in this offense. So I don't know that he's going to be a lot I don't know that he's going to be asked to do much more than that. It's just, again, my guess. I feel like that's kind of the ceiling in terms of his usage, but I could be wrong. And I'm excited to see how they use him, whether it's in those short yardage situations or what. But like you alluded to, he's got speed, he's got power. If he can stay on the field, he can make an impact.
Deliver us a take. I think Thomas dropped out. Thomas is currently out on the routes right now, so it's unfortunate. His connection, he did allude to before we went live that he might drop out, so we'll see if we can get him back. But Chris, I'll just elaborate on your point a little bit further, and I agree. I think Damien Harris could replicate, some of the slack that Singletary left for James Cook to have this year. However, I hear that ping. He's back. All right, Thomas, you're back. I was scared. I thought you were gone.
No, I clicked. Yeah, I should have clicked a link. Something popped up on my phone and it completely took me away from here. I apologize.
No worries, man. So give me your take on Damien Harris and his use in the offense this year.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say welcome to the Athletes Are Younger Than You club, because Chris and I have already fallen victim to that, where NFL players are, generally speaking, much younger than us. So congratulations. Aside from that, Damien Harris, and I always like to go back to this because, there are players that have banner days against teams. And when it comes to Damien Harris, when he's played the Buffalo Bills in four matchups, he had 13 carries for 48 yards and 3.7 yards per carry. 18 carries, 103 yards for 5.7 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. 11 attempts, 111 yards, 10.1 yards per carry and a touchdown. And 16 attempts, 102 yards for 6.4 yards a carry and a touchdown. Damien Harris has been very, very good against us. The biggest issue, which everybody knows, is his prevailing health. And if he can fix that, if he can straighten that out, if he can get himself put into a position where maybe, just maybe, he can stay relatively healthy or even healthy as it stands, I think he's going to have an impact role. Back when we had CJ Spiller and Fred Jackson, the big thing about the two of them was you had two guys that complemented each other incredibly well. Quite frankly, we just haven't had that in a long time. And I don't think that's for a lack of trying. I think that Brandon Beane tried. He tried it with Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, except for Zach Moss's booty and Devin Singletary's not fast. So now that you move into this situation where you've got James Cook and Damien Harris and Latavius Murray, Damien Harris can provide the ability to not only get those short yardage plays, but he can also break a long one for a touchdown because he has some actually surprising speed. So I think that Damien Harris, and I like what Kep was saying, it's going to be hard to truly predict or, kind of pinpoint exactly what kind of role he's going to have. But what we can say for certain is that he is going to have an impact in the game plan because he can do things that, quite frankly, we just haven't had somebody been able to do in a number of years. So if Damien Harris can, provide that kind of thunder to James Cook's lightning, I think we're in a good spot. And like I alluded to initially, I think that we have a running back room now that provides a certain level of, what do I want to call it? Fear in another team's game plan. And that's something that I think is important when it comes to scripting and figuring out what you want to do against some big teams. And then the other thing about it, I think that Damien Harris could provide, when you have games like we did against the Bengals where things weren't going necessarily right, you can lean on a guy like Damien Harris to get you those hard-nosed 3 yards at the end of a game, or maybe try to just drain the other team's, defense a little bit and provide yourself a little bit more time for your defense to rest as well. So it's a multifaceted approach in terms of what Damien Harris can do. But I think adding a guy like him, a guy that has been a terror against us, if you saw it, he's been a pain in our neck. I think it's great. And like you said, Joe, getting him for pennies on the dollar because of his injury history is just a coup for Brandon Beane. Finding a guy that could provide something that we don't have for little to no salary is I think it's great. I think we're in a good spot, and I think Damien Harris could have a really, really nice carved out role for this team.
Yes, and as I was saying earlier, I think his role is going to be specific this time, where he started out as being the featured back in New England, and obviously injuries kind of gave Ramondre Stevenson the way to get to the RB1 role in New England, and he's proven himself by being a very good 1,000-yard rusher. I don't think it's indicative of Harris's ability, but Harris's availability. And where I think his role in the Bills offense is going to not only be useful, but I think it'll work better now with his injury concern is the fact that he's not going to be your feature back. And the fact that I think his role coming into this team is to be the short yardage back that can power through a line and to be a goal line back. Things that could still potentially run the risk of injury. It can happen at any point for a running back. But to me, it's more Cook is our one. You are there to take the slack off Cook and to give us some powerful runs when we need them, when we need that 1 yard, when we need those 3 yards. If it's 2nd and 4 and we don't want to give Josh, any sort of leeway to throw a stupid ball, because Josh has dumb brains sometimes. And I love Josh Allen. Let's be realistic though. So to give kind of less pressure on not only Allen, but Cook, you bring in a Damien Harris. You know the injury concerns are there. But to me, if he stays healthy and even provides you a similar game line to last year, it's still successful because I think Harris's yards and carries might not be nearly as high as it was in New England, but it's going to be good enough to be productive in the Buffalo Bills offense. And I think the next running back that we're going to move on to is someone that feels like the very embarrassment of the riches contingency plan for Damien Harris if he gets hurt, and that's old man Murray, and that's Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray, I alluded to his stats earlier, but 688 yards, 4.3 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 1 fumble at 33 years old, 12 consistent games with the Denver Broncos, a lost-cause team that gave him the ball when they needed to. Still very, very capable back in his older age, and someone I feel is not going to be the starting RB2. But someone that is a break glass in case of emergency, because we know Damien Harris has an injury history and might need to be shelved for a couple of games. Thomas, you are a fan of Latavius Murray. We'll start with you, go to Chris. Give me your take on him this year.
So it's nice to bring back the Central New Yorker, guy that's from this area. I think that's great. And a guy that finally could potentially be on a winning team and have a chance at some long success instead of playing on a team where he's just beating his body for the sake of just playing in an NFL game with hopes to get to the end of the season. Like you said, I think that he is going to be, him and Damien Harris are going to go back and forth. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's Damien Harris's role. I think it should be based on what he was getting paid. His dead cap hit is $1.4 million. So it's not as though you can just get rid of him. So, but with Latavius, I think the thing that's nice about this is, like you said, it's another guy that provides a role that the Bills just really didn't have much of. I think the other piece to this, if you look at the way the Bills have their team kind of built right now, we don't have Taiwan Jones this year. And that was a big issue last year because Taiwan Jones, like a lot of these special teamers, ate up a spot on the roster that could have potentially gone to somebody else. Naim Heinz, I truly believe, I don't think he's going to have much of a role outside of his, kick and punt return ability. I think he might have very limited action. I guess it's possible that they could do more, but I think that Brandon Beane really saw that role for him was so impactful that they're going to utilize him in that kind of little small schism. I think Latavius Murray could absolutely see himself on the game day roster and getting a jersey. Could it be that he is just a practice squad running back and they don't have to worry about it and he'll stay there all season? They use him when they need him? 100%. But I don't necessarily think that is indicative, or the way that they signed him is indicative of where his spot on this roster may lie. I think he has a role. I think he could have a defined role on this team. And for a guy that still has a lot of juice, if you haven't seen him, go watch last year's tape. The guy has a lot of burst. He's a big dude. He's like Leonard Fournette, but actually can move. He's a very, very talented guy who's had a talented, long career in the NFL. Wherever he's gone, he's had sustained success, which is important. And I think, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, like you said, Joe, the more talent you can add to this roster, the better. It's never going to be a bad thing adding more people that can potentially provide some type of impact. And the other part about it, which I think is, like I said with Damien Harris, when it comes to the end of the season, and we saw this last year, the NFL season is grueling. It's long. It's generally speaking injury riddled. The Bills have been kind of very, very lucky, more so than last year. They were lucky to get through how many years with most of their roster intact come playoffs. You saw last year that was not the case. So a lot of times what they want to do, and if they're going to try to become a team that can maybe be more balanced in the playoffs, I think this is something that lends itself to that belief that maybe they just need to have a couple more bodies, a couple more pieces that can provide impact later on and just kind of fill those rooms out. So I think, Latavius Murray is a great get when they got him for next to nothing. But I don't think he's just a guy that's on practice squad or he's a guy that's in training camp. I think he could have again, defined role. He is still got a lot left in the tank.
What you think, Chris?
I like RJ's comment here that he was the Broncos RB1 last year down the stretch, and it's crazy that he's now like our RB3 or 4, I guess, depending on how it all shakes out. But yeah, man. I mean, just like I really like having the presence of a guy who's been there and done it for a while. I mean, he's got over 6,000 yards in his career, like almost 1,500 carries. He's averaged over 4 yards a carry throughout his career. He's been consistent. It's just someone great to have as an option. And there was something else I wanted to bring up from the comments here. This conversation that Jim and RJ were having about load management. It's interesting to me. RJ says that it's probably a selling point for running backs that, they can say they're trying to extend their careers by using load management. It's interesting. I wonder if the carries versus, the ability to get stats, right? The opportunity, the usage is more of a selling point, or the ability to extend your career. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. And I wonder, for a guy like Latavius Murray, who at this point in his career, he kind of knows who he is in the league and looking for that opportunity to keep going. I think an opportunity here where he's not necessarily going to be asked to do that bell cow role, it probably is attractive to him. It's tough. I don't know how many offers he had out there, but I can't imagine that the Bills were the only team that were interested in signing him.
Yeah, I don't know, but he sat on the market for a while. So, I mean, I'm sure he got an offer or two from a team that probably had the same thing. And maybe his mindset was, I'll just go to the team that I think, based on these offers, has the most chance for success. I won't know for sure. We probably won't know for sure until he says something about it. So, unless he's did in his conference, I didn't watch, so I'm not 100% sure on that. But yeah, valid points, gentlemen. Latavius Murray, to me, I mean, maybe he could take that spot away from Harris and actually be the back two, which if he's productive and he plays like he did in Denver, fine by me. And I do really want to pull up one thing that Jim brought up in our chat, because I do have to say, I agree with this take. I'm very excited about this running back room, but I still think that our offensive line changes will have a bigger impact in our short yard running game than bringing in Harris, especially if Torrance starts. 100% agree with that. I think that's the bread and butter for this team this year. I think that's one of the things that I have felt, and a lot of fans have felt, they just haven't addressed enough, or at least to an effective degree. And I think you're getting that this year. Torrance is a monster. He's a mean guy, and he has the size and power to move people if he wants to. Maybe his feet need work. I think he can overcome that very quickly. And I think I can foresee him taking that starting right guard spot and then having Bates be the Swiss Army man and just plug and play when you need him. And if that's the case, then you're talking about a behemoth of a human being next to your already really good run blocking center and really good run blocking right tackle. Again, I said this before, but those short yardage situations are going to be very fun this year, assuming everyone's healthy and can produce as we expect. But of course, leave some room for salt, leave some room for some concern, as always, because things can not work out the way we thought. Don't want to put that in the universe, but I always try to not get myself too pumped up, because I have a tendency to do that. And some way, somehow, the team manages to do something differently. Hopefully not with running, hopefully not with offense this year, and hopefully something as trivial as special teams that doesn't even matter. And speaking of special teams, we're going to talk about our final running back today, Mr. Naim Heinz. Another person who's younger than me, by the way. So yes, Thomas, I am in this club. 18 games throughout the whole year, 26 years old. He had about 252 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, one rushing touchdown as well. But as you alluded to earlier, and I think it's without saying now, he had 700 kick return yards, 2 of those touchdowns, both in the Patriots game, with 101 yards being the longest. I mean, I don't think there's too much to discuss with him, but Chris, we'll start with you. We'll go to Thomas, then we'll end our day today. Just talk to me generally about what you think Naim Heinz will do this year, and are you confident in him really as a returner, or maybe as like a scat gadget back, if you had to guess?
Yeah, I think that, as Thomas had already alluded to, that he's primarily the return guy, which I thought he did, pretty well in that role. We saw a couple of return touchdowns against the Patriots. That was a pretty special performance that he put on in that game. But he was pretty solid. I think that he answered a big question that the team had. Who was going to be the guy back there fielding punts and kickoffs? And I don't know that we need to ask that question this year. I feel like he's got that role. As for the offense, the Bills have shown a reluctance to use their return specialist on offense. We saw with Andre Roberts, he didn't really get much. He didn't get many offensive snaps. Naim Heinz did throughout the games that he played with the Bills last year. He was on the field a fair amount on offense. I don't know if that's going to continue. Obviously, now you've got Deontay Hardy coming in, who can do a lot of that stuff that Isaiah McKenzie used to do in his role, his gadget role, before he, they tried to make him a slot receiver last year. So I think you might see Heinz on the field on offense. They don't need necessarily to have him there now that you've got these other weapons. But I think that having more guys that can do more things, it's never really a bad thing. And Heinz can, he's great at catching passes out of the backfield. And that's something that we know the Bills have been looking for. They drafted James Cook that was certainly part of the reasoning behind that draft pick. Heinz definitely filled that return role. But I think that part of the appeal to trading for him was that he is a running back who could catch passes out of the backfield. So I think there's a chance you might see him more involved than it might appear by the end of the season.
Thomas, final thoughts on Naim Heinz?
So I think that there's obviously, like Kep said, and I don't want to regurgitate the same stuff he just repeated. Not repeated. I don't want to say the same things he just said. But what I will say is I think his biggest uphill climb is going to be the fact that on both facets of what he can do, there are a lot of guys in front of him. I mean, you saw, like Kep said, Deontay Hardy was brought in, but there's a lot more weapons this year than there was last year in terms of the offense. And I think potentially he was brought on the field because, we just didn't have a whole lot in front of him. There was just a very depleted team, and they used him. And I think maybe this year they can be a little bit more disguised with the ability to use him. Obviously, last year when he was on the field, he knew what was coming, which unfortunately and inherently was not a good thing, because every time he was on the field, the ball was going right to him. So teams kind of just zeroed in on him at that point. But I think that his primary and big role is going to be exactly what everybody anticipates. I think he'll get some sub packages, some stuff that Isaiah McKenzie did. I think you started to see that he was kind of replicating that role last year. I think you'll see some of that, but to be honest with you, I don't anticipate him having a very big role. I think he provides a security blanket, and we saw year over year that Brandon Beane kept trying to figure out who he could put back there as the kick and punt returner. He didn't want to keep putting Micah Hyde back there because he didn't want to risk putting an injury on all-pro safety, which ended up happening anyway. You saw he drafted a guy in Marquise Stevenson, Ryan's favorite, who probably is not going to be in the league after this season. We've gone through a litany of guys, and I think Brandon Beane just saw if he can find a way to solidify a roster spot with a guy that he knows he can trust and can also potentially add a spark, he's willing to do it. And, you know, even if they do change the rules in terms of the way that punt and kick returns are going these days, you can still make an impact as a punt and kick returner. Naim Heinz proved that last year. If he can do that this year, that's great. Even, you know, 1 out of every couple games, if he can make an impact in a game, that's huge for the Bills, because every little step, every little blemish from another team can make a big time impact in a game. You talked about this earlier, Joe. Sometimes luck is what you need. And if we can get a little bit of our luck on our side and flip the script on a game, maybe that's what Naim Heinz can provide. I just think he's going to be something that maybe he's just utilized here and there and sporadically, and that's fine. And, you know, like I said, kind of with Latavius Murray, every piece that you can add that can provide a different aspect to this offense is a welcomed aspect, because you need to diversify your offense in an NFL where it's getting more and more pass happy.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing about Heinz real quick?
Go for it.
So he had 66 snaps during the regular season for the Bills on offense. He was targeted 7 times and he had 5 carries. So this is one of the things that Aaron and I talked about it. I don't know how many times on Cover One and Friends last season. He was on the field a lot as this sort of decoy, right? He was the jet motion guy on a lot of these plays. He was trying to, they used him to draw the attention of the defense away from, wherever the ball was actually going. That's something that I could see more of from Heinz is, and I feel like that was a lot of the frustration, right? People were saying, well, you brought this guy in, why aren't you using him? But they were using him. It just wasn't as a primary ball carrier.
Yeah. And to me, what this whole discussion kind of shines light on with Naim Heinz, with all of the backs we mentioned, and gentlemen, thank you for your really great points on all of them, because you haven't said anything that I think is off base, and I agree with most of it. Naim Heinz, to me, is depth for Hardy now. He's a part of like a group of speedsters that if one goes down, you can replace somebody with the other. Even though I think, as you alluded to, Thomas, his role is going to be the returner and maybe here or there pass catcher, I do think you're still going to see him in motion. I do think the chances you could have both him and Hardy on the field for some fun little speedster combinations and really just get creative with this offense. But ultimately, what his role and a lot of others in this offense boils down to me, is that the Bills have great depth on paper. They've really built this roster up to address all of the offensive weaknesses that seem to have happened last year. Again, talk about Dalton Kincaid being your potential slot guy, but then you have Shearfield and Hardy, guys that can both man the slot if you want them to, as well as Shakir entering a year 2. You talk about adding in more versatility in your running game. Boom, you bring in James Cook for year 2 to be a speed back or someone that can catch the ball out of the backfield if you'd like. And then you have Damien Harris and Latavius Murray to shore up the power back system. You talk about interior offensive line. They've added depth there as well. It feels like to me, you can look at the receiver room in a vacuum and find some complaints, but that's taking away from the whole offensive structure, which I think is best Bills have had probably in my lifetime. If I'm being completely honest, as far as depth, as far as potential talent, as far as upside goes, it could genuinely be the best one we've seen ever. It could. And I don't think that's off base to say. But with that, guys, that is the end of our running back discussion. The episode is not over, though, because I do need to share one thing. Now, I said this earlier in the week. I made a poll this week, and that poll was going to go on this episode, and I am going to keep my promise. And the poll is this: what is scarier, space or the ocean? And most of you said the ocean, and I'm going to say this right now. Most of you are wrong. Wrong. 100% wrong. I do not for the life of me understand how most of you think the ocean is scarier than space. Is the ocean scary? Yes, the ocean is scary. There are giant sea monsters in there. Sure, the ocean is scary. But space is an infinite vacuum of darkness that's freezing cold with celestial bodies that exist beyond our comprehension. And you want to sit there and tell me that the ocean is scarier? No, I do not agree. I do not agree with any of you that voted for that. And if you voted for space, you're on the right side of history, friends. Thank you. Chris Thomas, final thoughts on this poll, and then we'll do our sign off.
I don't want any part of either, to be honest. I mean, I'll swim in the ocean, up to a certain point, but like it's I think both are legitimately scary. I think that you're right though. I mean, people can survive in the ocean for a little bit of time at least. You go out in space without a spacesuit, you're done in seconds. So I don't know. It's a something I never really imagined I would be thinking that much about, but I think you're right that space wins or should have won in this situation. But the ocean's in the news, right?
It is, as Rick alludes to here. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I understand. I'm not saying the ocean isn't scary. I am saying space is way scarier. And okay, RJ, I'll give you this point. But you also don't know. You don't know what's on other planets, my friend. You do not.
But here's the thing about this, Joseph.
He dropped my full name. He dropped my given name. This is going to be a take. I'm ready.
How often does one go to space? I can go to the ocean anytime. I can drive to the Atlantic Ocean. I could fly to the Pacific. I could go to the Indian. I could go to the Arctic. You know what I can't do? Go to space, because I'm broke.
Why? Well, besides you're broke, why can't you go to space, Thomas? Why is it harder to go to space than the ocean, Thomas? Elaborate, please.
Why is it harder? Because only smart people get to go to space.
But why? You see where you're going with this? Because space will kill you. It will kill you if you go to it.
So will the ocean. It's claimed more lives than space does. And in fact, here's one better. Nobody has died in space yet. They've only died on their way.
Is that true?
Check it.
All right, I got to look that up.
I'm aware, and you can check that fact. I do not believe anybody has died in space. They have died on their way to getting to there.
You know what I hope for? Just before we sign off, I really hope that someone was like on YouTube at 12:36 p.m. on a Saturday, saw the episode title, and was like, "Oh, Cover One's live," and they tune in, and here we are talking about space in the ocean. Because you're late, you missed it. Listen, just because you can't get to it easier does not mean it's less scary. It does not. That is not an argument I'm willing to entertain. Oh, great. I could go to the ocean and die. That's fun. You want to know what's scarier? An infinite vacuum that you could also die in. I could touch salt water and I could tread in it and have a great day at the beach with my family, as most people do when they're at the ocean. You know where I can't tread and have a great day with my family? The infinite vacuum of space. The cold depths of space. And that is where we're ending the show. I can't go on. I'm getting too heated for this. My room is hot. I'm sweating. This is it. We're done now. Okay, guys. Thank you. But great takes. And all objectivity, you guys were fantastic today. Thank you so much for joining me today, Chris and Thomas. I had a lot of fun on this episode. I appreciate all of your insight into both discussions we had. To all of you, I'm reading the comments and they're killing me. To all of you in our comment section right now that joined our discussion today, thank you so much for tuning in, contributing in any way you can. If you're listening to this episode after the fact, thank you so much for your listen. Again, please, please, please like this video, like the content on Cover One, subscribe to Cover One, subscribe to the Premium Pass. We really appreciate all of your support and it helps us out immensely. Chris and Thomas, now that we're signing off, I want to give you the opportunity to plug whatever you have going on in your world. Chris, I know there's something special going on tomorrow night, and I'm glad you're here that you get to promo it, and I will share my screen for it as well. So give the world what's going on tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about what we're doing tomorrow night over on Playback. And, we've been doing some fun stuff there, some Sabres watch parties. We did a golf show last week. We did, a draft recap. It's a new platform for Cover One. If you go to playback.tv/Cover One, you can join our room there. It's free. And tomorrow night we're doing our own take on the Ocho at 8:00, obviously. Cover 8, the Ocho. And, we'll be doing all kinds of fun stuff like I think spike ball, tech ball, world chase tag, and everybody's favorite. You know what it is, Joe.
Slippery stairs.
It's gonna be great, and we have a lot of fun on Playback. We answer important questions like, is the ocean a soup? if you guys,
I'm bringing this conversation tomorrow, by the way, 100%.
Yeah, you should. But yeah, if you see Ryan Sullivan, who's at his bachelor party right now, you can tell him, he's a staunch believer in soup Earth theory.
My God.
We don't need to get too far into that right now, but suffice to say that it's going to be a lot of fun over on Playback tomorrow night at 8:00. Again, it's playback.tv/cover1. I'll put the link here in the comments. Just join our room and show up tomorrow night. We'll have a good time.
What you got going on, Thomas?
So, if you haven't seen my show, it's Buffalo Late Night every Thursday at 9 p.m. I discuss all things, not including space and ocean, because we are too highbrow for such low-level conversations such as that. No, we talk about all things. It's we have a lot of fun. This past week we had Joe Miller and Bruce Nolan. We talked about the Sean McDermott situation prior to him getting his extension, DeAndre Hopkins, and if that could ever happen again. But one thing I do want to say, and Joe, thank you again for having me on today. I do appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, guys. Right now, kind of as I spoke about earlier, it's a very dry season for content creators. We spend a lot of time grinding, a lot of time making sure we've got content to provide you guys each and every week. So if you like what we're doing, if you appreciate our content, make sure you're sharing this stuff. Make sure you're sharing the shows, liking, subscribing to our YouTube channel, both this one as well as our fantasy football one that's run by Chris Chouse. There's a lot of really good content out there right now that we're providing, and I'm really excited as to what's going on this season. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to be bringing to the table. New stuff like what Chris Kepner is doing right now with Playback, and you'll see more of that come the Sabres season. And then obviously the big thing is we'll be at training camp. So if you are going to Rochester to go to training camp, the Cover One crew will be there. Come over and say hello. We are incredibly friendly people for the most part. But I do genuinely appreciate you guys tapping into Cover One and tapping into my show, and look forward to what's going on in the future.
One other thing that could really helps, guys, if you like our tweets. We don't talk about that, but the tweet, liking a tweet really helps get it in front of more people's eyes. Like when Cover One may have 20,000 plus followers, but the tweets might only hit a fraction of that if they don't get the engagement. So if you see us out there, just hit the like, even if it's kind of a mediocre tweet.
Like my poll. Absolutely, man. And yes, guys, first and foremost, Chris and Thomas, I can't thank you enough. Short notice. I know you had your Saturday ahead of you. For you guys to join on the fly after circumstances arose to join me today, I really, really, really appreciate it. So thank you both so much for it. Again, all of you in the chat, I've had so much fun reading your comments today. I love that we got the consistent group of people showing up and some new faces as well. All of your contributions are appreciated. You will always get a screen share in my book. I really want to keep that discussion going. So thank you for all of you that tuned into this episode after the fact. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your listen. If you all can, all of you in the chat, all of you still with us, please make sure also to subscribe to all of Cover One's podcasts on Apple, on Spotify. There was an RSS issue that happened a few months ago, and we're trying to get people to come back just because Apple's stupid. So let's get those subscriptions. Let's get people back on our network. Let's have people listen in, like all of our content. You guys are amazing, and we really, really appreciate it. That was this week's episode of Under Review. RJ, thank you for the kind words. All of you, thank you for the kind words. I am so happy to be here at Cover One. I know this is getting a little sentimental, but I've only been here for a few months, and you all make me feel so welcomed, and it's been a great time. So thank you, thank you, thank you all. I will be back next week. Some new guests this time. We're going to be talking about something. I'm figuring that out as we speak. But in the meantime, you all have a great weekend, a great Saturday. Hope you all stay safe. Go Bills. And remember, Sean McDermott, your coach, whether you like it or not. Goodbye.